Hello everyone. Welcome back to another awesome episode of this amazing story. I did not write this story, the writer is 7ways56, please check them out. Now let's dive in. Izuka looked at the crowd that was standing right in front of UA's gate. Somehow the media had gotten word about All Might's position teaching at the school. Looking at the crowd of reporters, it was very clear that they had come here to get an interview with him. It's a slow news day, isn't it? Hisashi didn't particularly like the media's tendency to hound heroes. It was something that had rubbed off on Izuka, who was wary of the thought of being on the news. Leave now. The silver-haired girl looked as Katsuki was being interviewed. His glare caused the reporters to move away as he walked to the front gate. No sooner as he did they tried to look for anyone else to talk to. One of them caught sight of Izuka as they soon tried to get an interview from her. "Excuse me, do you have a minute?" "No," Izuka simply stated as she answered before her interviewer could finish. The other news crews looked at her as Izuka walked right past them. "Seriously, where are the police?" She didn't dwell on it too much. Shota came walking out to greet the reporters. He looked at the silver-haired girl before letting out a sigh. "I hate dealing with the media." Being underground, he tended to utterly avoid them at any turn. Even amateurs who just had their phones with them unsettled him. "Listen, I will have to ask you to leave the premises." One of the reporters, a young woman just starting her career, walked up to him. "We aren't leaving until we get a story on Dash." She jumped back as UA's gate was soon closed by a door of solid metal. "What the hell?" Shota had to suppress the urge to chuckle at her inexperience. Most news crews knew that UA had a defense measure in place to prevent anyone without a student ID or a teacher's pass to enter, barring exceptions of course. "I mean it, if you aren't off by the end of the day we are allowed to call the cops." On the other side of things, the reporter tried to tell at the school to let them through. All the while someone watched the events unfolding with a smirk. Looks like phase 1 of the plan is going off without a problem. The moment Izuka walked into the classroom, she watched as Katsuki looked away from her. A sudden change from his usual tendency to turn to her with a scowl when she walked in. When she took her seat, she could hear a few of the class wondering why he was still here after his stunt he pulled yesterday. "Hey, Izuka, I've been wondering." Izuka turned to see Mina, who had a curious expression on her face. "You told us that your father's a pro, though I am at a loss for how you can do all those things you can do." They were asking about what her parents' quirks were basically. It's very obvious that her quirk is rather extraordinary, to say the least. Izuka shrugged her shoulders. "Well, it's not from him or my mom if that's what you are asking." That brought a questioning look to the pink girl's face. "I'm adopted." "Well, shouldn't you still be able to check records to see about the quirks your birth parents gave you?" Momo brought up a good point to the rest of the class. Izuka let out a sigh as she was reminded about the fact she had no idea where she came from. She had come to terms with it, but if she could learn where, she wouldn't hesitate to take it. "I don't." Before this conversation could continue, the door to their classroom was opened as Shota walked into class. The students turned to him as he looked at them. While they had done nothing yesterday, the memory of his test on the first day still lingered in their minds. "All right, today you will be doing something that will sit with you for the rest of your lives." The class looked at him as they each readied themselves for what was to come. "You need to pick a class representative." That wasn't what they were expecting. This still was a school after all, so, of course, they would have normal school activities. This is a big decision because the action of becoming class representative would be a mark of leadership. Shota stopped before remembering something. "That reminds me, if anyone is interested, UA has a team class for those who are looking to form a hero team." That last part caught Izuka's attention. She wondered why he was talking about hero teams. Sure, many hero teams were formed from friends who got along in their time at their hero school, but last she recalled that wasn't actually a thing that UA taught. The rest of the class was more concerned with who was going to be the class representative. "Come on everyone, all the girls wearing short skirts less than 30 centimeters. Izuka turned to the class pervert as she gave him a threatening glare. She was just barely holding back her desire to beat him up where he stood. Preferably until every bone in his body was broken. Instead of fear, he just waved his hand dismissively. "Nah, not you, you're practically flat and underdeveloped." The rational side of her mind was only barely relieved by this. No, in a strange twist, Izuka was irrationally wondering why he was just utterly dismissive of her. That's when she realized that she kind of was the most underdeveloped girl in class. Even Kyoka beat her in that department. "Okay, first chance I get, I'm breaking his whole body." In his seat, Minoru Mineta ft the sudden and fearful urge to avoid Izuka. Katsuki had enough of this nonsense and stood up, yelling out to the rest of the class. Just draw lots to pick a stupid representative. The class all looked at him with confused expressions. That why every one of you extras in deku, he glared at Izuka fighting back his anger, have an equal chance at being the stupid class representative. Despite the insult directed at nearly all of them at being called extras, with the exception of Izuka, they had to admit his idea was a good one. Pretty sure the class was in agreement to go with a lottery to decide who would be the class representative. Shota was reminded that class 1 to 3 back when they were his students did the same thing themselves. Izuka stood at the front of the class as she looked at the rest of them. Standing next to her was Shoto Todoraki. The two of them had become the class representative and vice representative respectively. So, then your class representative is Izuka Midoriya with Shoto Todoraki as your vice representative. Izuka turned to the half and half team next to her. In the few days here all anyone knew about him was that he had a scare on his left eyes, he was a loner, and he only used half of his quirk. A quirk which allowed him to manipulate both fire and ice. The reasons why he never used his flames was unknown, but what he could do with just his ice powers was rather amazing. You know, his last name sounds familiar now that I think about it. The class looking at the two of them eventually just rolled with it. Out of the two, at least Izuka seemed to be a decent choice for the position. You know, I think I'm okay with this. Denki looked to the other members in the class who all had similar thoughts. Yeah, Izuka's smart and I'm sure Shoto might surprise us. Shota finished the paperwork making it official. Personally, he found it funny that the two of them would be the class representatives. He did a bit of research on Izuka and found out that her father, adopted father as it was made aware, was a pro-hero who specialized in being undercover. Both of them are raised by pro-heroes and are likely above the rest of them when it comes to training. Though that just meant he could set a higher bar for both of them. I wonder if I should look into possibly getting into contact with Izuka's parents. Toshinori sat in the teacher's lounge as he thought about what the principal had told him. Apparently, there were two other creations of his nemesis running around the wilds. This revelation started to worry the crippled symbol of peace ever so much. He had no idea where any of All for One's other creations were, and when it came to numbers he was still unsure how many there actually were. Right now his thoughts were consumed by the one that they had here at UA. So far Izuka wasn't a problem, and in fact, besides the issues with Katsuki Bakugo, she seemed to be a bit of an upstanding person. All things considered, given the likelihood that she did have personality traits pre-programmed into her from his nemesis. According to Nizu, enough of the creation process was salvaged to learn that during development they were given an education feed into their minds. The implications of this did mean that on some level Izuka had it somewhere within her mind. We lucked out what with her growing up with a normal life. Though normal was a relative term given that her adopted father was a pro-hero. All things considered, this was possibly the best-case scenario for any of All for One's build-a-children. She might just be an amazing hero when she goes pro. The idea of one of All for One's creations being used for good made him look at his own hands. This wasn't the first time it had happened, but in the last 200 years, only his own quirk had been the exception. One for all, an accidental creation of possibly the most dangerous criminal mastermind to ever live. A creation that had been used to save many lives and even bring him down at long last. I wonder if this is a sign of some kind? The terrible truth of it all was that his time as All Might was coming to an end. After his titanic fight had crippled him, he knew that his time was limited. Add to the fact that he knew that with All for One gone, his position was creating a vacuum for many to take his place. As much as Toshinori loathed to say it, his nemesis did help to keep the criminal underworld in check. With his retirement, a possibility in the near future, the symbol that kept many of them in the dark disappearing will spell disaster. All the more reason to pick my successor. Already he had a candidate for such a role. One of UA's so-called Big Three. A student who was scouted, not by him but by his former sidekick, who thought he would be a perfect successor. The other teachers seemed to share that sentiment as well. In fact, they even called him his potential successor without knowing of his quirk. It would be easy to pick him as his successor. Yet, why is it that I haven't done so? Perhaps it was because he didn't want to just give one for all to anyone. He wanted to make sure that the person he gave it to not only embodied what it meant to be a true hero but also showed it. Actions speak longer than rhetoric. While he was sure that this young man was likely one of both, he had to see it with his own eyes. Izuka's lunch took one of her two drink out as she gulped down the metallic-tasting liquid. As soon as she was done, she moved over to the second cup her mother had packed for her. So, that's actually blood you are drinking, right? Ijiro had joined the little table that Izuka sat at. The likely reason being that all others seemed to be full with the exception of Katsuki's. Though given how he acted yesterday, Ijiro wasn't going to sit by him anytime soon. Izuka finished the second one with a nod. Animal blood and yes. Ijiro looked on with confusion as Ochako turned to him. It's kind of because of her quirk. Ochako put her ball of white rice down as she explained it further. Izuka can turn into a monstrous form based on a lamprey which do drink blood. Ijiro stopped as he heard that. He turned to Izuka, a question on his mind. You can transform as well? There was amazement and even a bit of jealousy at this. How do you have a quirk like that? I just do. Izuka didn't have anything more to say about it. I have actually been learning new things about it all my life. Suddenly the sound of an alarm caught their attention. All around the older students got up and left from their tables, confusing them. Tenya stopped one of the fleeing students. What's going on? The student turned to them in disbelief. After realizing that they really didn't have any idea, he pointed outside and explained. That's the level 3 alarm, meaning that UA is under attack. That was quite the surprise to hear. Everyone at Izuka's table got up and left to evacuate with the students except for the silver-haired girl herself. Attacking UA wasn't a good idea, as being a hero school it was filled with pro-heroes and many heroes in training. Furthermore, All Might was a teacher here. The symbol of peace who literally scared villains by merely existing. Izuka headed for the windows to see what was going on. What she saw wasn't a team of villains attacking the school with the heroes fighting them back. No, instead it was a bunch of the reporters from before having slipped right into the grounds. Izuka just looked at the rest of the students with some disappointment on her face. Am I the only one who thought to question this? Izuka looked around and saw that both Katsuki and Shoto had actually stayed back as well. The three of them, it seemed, were the only three who didn't get consumed by the panic. Taking out and extending her lance to its full form, Izuka looked and channeled her power through the lance and let out a blast of burning light hitting the ceiling just above the doorway everyone was racing to. At the sight, everyone turned around and saw the silver-haired girl pointing out the window. It's nothing but the media. A few of the students turned to the window and sure enough, Izuka was proven correct. There were only the media outside with the teachers walking out. The panic was completely gone, as most of the student body felt rather stupid for just pushing and shoving each other. The police arrived not long afterwards, and finally took the reporters off the premise. As school was done for the day, Izuka walked out for the train station with Ochako and Mina following her. Tenya decided to stay after class to look into a few of the after-school activities that UA had to offer. Ochako turned to Izuka. Hey, Izuka, that was amazing what you did during lunch. The silver-haired girl shrugged. To her, it just seemed logical. After all, what kind of criminal organization was crazy enough to attack one of the most prestigious hero schools in the world? I just knew something was up. If you think about it, who would try to attack a school filled with pro-heroes, including All Might? That was a good point now that Ochako thought about it. Most villains wouldn't try anything if they knew All Might was in the area. The symbol of peace was also a symbol of fear. The villains feared him, as All Might's overwhelming power was enough to take on most of them with a single attack. I feel kind of silly that I didn't think about it myself. Hey, don't beat yourself up. I didn't either, Mina chimed in as she walked forward. When the alarm sound blared, she joined with nearly everyone else to leave the room. I think only Shoto and Katsuki didn't panic. As the three of them continued down to the train station. The train seemed to be delayed, likely due to a villain attack or an accident with someone's quirk. As they waited, Ochako turned to Izuka with a question on her mind. Hey, Izuka, there's a new restaurant near my apartment. If you want, maybe we could both check it out this Saturday? A small part of Izuka thought of it as a date. That part was quickly silenced as she knew that Ochako was likely asking to hang out with her. Sure, I got nothing to do. Hey, you think I can come with? Mina asked both of them. She would rather join the both of them than deal with her family over the weekend. Plus, it did sound fun after all. Both Ochako and Izuka looked at each other. They turned back to her with a nod. If you want. Mina pumped her fist up. Finally, a girls' day with two of her friends. Ochako's train finally came to the station. She waved back to the two of them as she walked to her train. Mina turned to Izuka as a question formed in her mind. So, yesterday I did notice that you were looking at Ochako. Mina had a raised eyebrow. You wouldn't happen to be into girls? Izuka looked away from Mina for a moment. She had never talked to anyone about her sexual preferences. That and her more devious kinks. Well, yes. She turned to Mina with a smirk on her face. Are you by some chance attracted to me? Mina had a tiny blush as she realized that Izuka had turned this on her. The pink girl raised and waved her hands frantically. No, I was just asking is all. Mina wondered when her train was going to get here. Izuka moved closer to her with a seductive look on her face. Oh, if you're asking then the answer is yes. It was funny watching Mina act like this from her advances. You do look rather pretty yourself, Izuka had a giggle as she pulled back from her. I couldn't help myself. Mina glared at her with her blush darling in embarrassment. That's not funny Izuka. Izuka looked at the box that Inko gave her. It was a gift from her uncle, a man working at one of the support companies that worked with heroes. Apparently, he had sent her something after Inko talked to her brother about Izuka making it into UA. Izuka turned her attention to her mother. Do you know what's in it? Inko shook her head. She hadn't taken a look at the box. Her brother had made it clear in the letter that came with the package that he wanted Izuka to open it as a surprise. Your uncle wanted it to remain a surprise for you, so I haven't opened it or anything. Opening the box, she was greeted with a note. Izuka pulled it out and read it. Apparently, her uncle was a bit mad that her father didn't contact him to make her Lance. Instead, he decided to make her another hero outfit. I have a guess that he made it to fit his desires of what I should wear. Still, some heroes had more than one outfit. Not commonly, as many of them found having two such outfits as a bit of a waste. This looked something like an even dress. She had no idea why her uncle had made her this. For a moment she wondered if it was just something he did when one of his more unconventional ideas came to him. Her uncle tended to think outside the usual box. Not to a massive extreme or to the point he would make questionable things, but still. Taking it all out, she got an idea of what he was going for. It's a dress? Turning to her mother, Izuka put it back in the box. A hero costume. Izuka didn't know if she should take it with her tomorrow or not. At first, she thought about handing it back to her uncle, but given how hard he worked to give it to her, that was probably never an option. I guess I'll take it with me to school tomorrow. Seeing as she had it, Izuka decided that she might as well try it on. A few minutes later, Izuka looked at herself with her full body mirror. The outfit was a soft black evening dress with a short tailored jacket and a lace-embellished ribbon over it. Both her hands were adorned long lace gloves which didn't expose any bit of exterior skin. A large ribbon was tied around her head, which came with something to tie her long hair into a ponytail to make it easier. The last thing that came with the outfit was breast pads. That bit caused Izuka's eyes to twitch as she just knew it was her uncle teasing her. You know, it's not actually that bad. The material was made to be many things. Fireproof, waterproof, wind-resistant, even had a degree of defense due to nanofiber reinforcement. Furthermore, looking at herself, Izuka knew this just felt right. Though if I had to pick, I think the armor I have is better for most cases. Within a hidden bar, someone looked at the news story in a magazine. All Might, being a teacher, had caught on extremely fast. Some of his merchandisers were even choosing to make new merchandise to reflect this. The magazine soon crumbled to dust within the hand of the person holding it. All Might does one thing and already everyone acts like it's the best thing since sliced bread. A warp gate opened up as Kurogyri appeared within the bar. The mist man turned to the person sitting at the bar with the dust of former magazine covering the counter. Tamura, can you please refrain from decaying objects over my counter? Tamura turned to him. His face covered under a severed hand. He looked at the figure that came with Kurogyri. So, teacher has approved of my plan? He did. Kurogyri had to admit the plan of attack was very well thought out. Infiltrating UA while using the reporters as a cover was a bit of a gamble. Still, it keyed off and they now knew when and where to strike the symbol of peace. I suspect you should get ready for the battle ahead. Tamura looked at the 20-sided dice he had with him. In his mind, it was all something of a game. They were wandering into a dungeon with the final boss at the ready. Does All Might escape? The dice rolls as it hit a 1. No, All Might fails to get away from our party. Tomorrow was going to be a lot of fun. At long last, the symbol of peace was going to fall. When the dust settles, he would make himself known. The true leader of the villain scene, just as his teacher attended. Kurogyri, what is the first thing you want to do after we put an end to All Might? Kurogyri had never once given it much thought. In truth, he didn't mind much on what he was to do. He had all he wanted and his problem had long since been solved by All for One. I guess return here and await orders. The answer was a bit of a disappointment for Tamura. Already he had plans for bigger things. With All Might down, crime would be more rampant. His organization would soon swell with recruits and perhaps he could use this to take out his competition. After all, if All Might was the final boss, then the rivals in the criminal underworld were the post-game. Ochako let out a sigh as she entered into her apartment. It was a small place given to her from the landlord of the building that her parents built. It was the reason she could go to UA in the first place. Boiling up some ramen noodles, she thought about her past few days at UA. It's already been a few days and already I think I made a few friends. One of which was on her mind right now. Izuka Midoriya was just naturally the person on her mind. The first friend she had made at UA. I can't believe I asked her to hang out with me. The sound of her microwave let her know that her ramen was finished. Taking it out, she took a seat in front of the old TV and looked at the news was playing. Predictably, it was nothing but talk about All Might being a teacher. One of the stories on the bottom of the screen that caught Ochako's attention was reports of 2 more dead bodies that were partly eaten found at the dock with the ghost ship. She shivered at the thought of whatever did this. Ochako really did hope that they stop it before these could escalate. As soon as she was done with her ramen, she turned the TV off. There wasn't a need to worry about it right now. The police commissioner looked at the thing that Naomasa had brought with him. He was at an utter loss for words when the insect man before him walked into the building along with one of his best detectives. "Can you run that by me again?" I said. I looked into the sighting and found what the 2 officers had seen. Naomasa motioned to the big insect man next to him. "This is Cositas. He has been living down there, and yes, he was born in the lab." The commissioner wished that Naomasa was pulling a prank on him. This was just so surreal even for this world. "Can he speak?" "Yes." Isaacs walked off of the train as she saw Ochako waving at her. The brunette had decided to wait for Izuka, seeing how her train had stopped before her. She looked, noticing with Izuka's long silvery hair was tied a ponytail. "Oh, I like what you did with your hair." Izuka took a second to turn her head to the ponytail. Personally, she rather did like it compared to how her hair used to be. "Thanks, it's something that came with the costume my uncle got me." Ochako looked with confusion before it dawned on her. "Wait, you mean you have another hero costume?" Izuka gave her a nod, being pulling up the duffel bag she had. "Yeah, I was going to wear it the next time we get to wear our costumes." She had figured that UA would allow her to wear it. Besides, she might as well wear it given that her uncle had gotten her it. Ochako was now curious as to just what it is. Thinking about Izuka's first outfit, Ochako had several ideas. Though each one of them seemed impractical given how her mind always pictured Izuka having a suit of armor. "Could I see it?" The silver-haired girl swung her bag over her shoulder. Izuka remembered that today they were going to have rescue training. Which, of course, meant that they were going to be allowed to wear their hero costumes. "Well, we are having rescue training today, so I am sure that you will see it." There was excitement for some of the students. At least those that did bother to read their class schedules. The door opened up as Shota walked into the classroom. He looked around, his eyes noticing the duffel bag next to Izuka. Making a mental note to stop her and ask about what was in it, he looked on at the rest of the class. All right, the wall next to him opened up as the suitcases with their costumes appeared. "Get your costumes on and meet me outside for the bus. It's time for rescue training." The students all moved to get their suitcases with the exception of Izuka. The silver-haired girl pulled up her duffel bag and looked at Shota. As everyone else walked out, her homeroom teacher looked at her. "So, what is in the bag?" "It's a costume that my uncle gave me." She opened it up and handed him the papers. Shota knew the company in question. They were the original creators of his capture tool. Well, until the person who made it left for another firm. This wasn't completely uncommon for a student in a hero school to get another costume as a gift. Though that was usually not given to those that were first years. "All right, you can wear it and I'll see about getting your suitcase changed so you can hold both of them." Izuka gave him a nod before walking out. With her gone, Shota thought about the rivalry that she and Katsuki had. It had been only 2 days, but such a thing was likely logically to flare up again. In a rescue situation, such a thing is unwanted. This is supposed to be training both for their roles as heroes and as a means for them to prepare for the provisional license exam. UA was an anomaly among the schools when it came to the exam. Usually outside of a special instance, the other schools tend to send their second or third years off to the test. UA was known to send out their first years and had a higher rate of failure because of it. He wouldn't admit it, but he saw more potential than usual with this class. Perhaps at least around half of them would pass. Nizu looked at Toshinori with a sigh. Truth be told, he didn't know if he was all that surprised. By the time he had gotten here, he had nearly used up his time limit. "You know that there is plenty of heroes in the city who could respond to the trouble, right?" He knew that, hell, he had actually ended up in the middle of several of them, and yet he did it anyway. Now here he was having to be called out of Class 1A's trip to the unforeseen simulation joint. I know it's just, a sigh escaped Toshinori's mouth as he looked down. I can't shake the feeling I just need to do it though. Him being a teacher at UA was meant to be a means to find a successor. Someone to take his place essentially when all was said and done. At some level, Toshinori knew that his days as a hero were slowly coming to an end. I see, I guess this is partly my fault then. Toshinori looked up as Nizu placed his teacup down. We both know that I've been pushing you to choose a successor since just before the entrance exam, as has your former sidekick. Toshinori could admit he would rather find his successor himself instead of being just given someone's word. He wanted to see if someone was worthy with his own eyes instead. Yeah, I think I want to pick my successor on my own from one of the students that catches my eye. Understandable. Nizu took another sip of his tea. The principal looked out the window as the bus holding Class 1A left for the unforeseen stimulation joint. It was a shame that they had to change the schedule at the last minute. You think you would be able to turn up to the USJ near the end of their training? Toshinori thought it over for a moment. He had about 20 minutes remaining in his All Might form. If he rested for a while he could push it up for a few minutes. It was an interesting thing about his time limit. If he spread it out across a day he could end up pushing the total time to almost 4 hours, though as a trade-off he lost an hour for his next day. I just might be able to. All Might should be able to make it to the tail end of the whole thing. It wasn't what was on the schedule that everyone was given, but at least it was something instead of him completely disappearing. That's wonderful to hear. The class looked at Izuka as the silver-haired girl looked at everyone else. They had expected Izuka to come out with her armor, but this wasn't it. So, wait, your uncle got you this outfit? Mina was given a nod from Izuka. Okay, so did it come with them? Izuka rolled her eyes in annoyance. They were, of course, talking about the breast pads. As Izuka had found out, they were sewn into the outfit. It was a joke of his. A sneaker was heard coming out of Minoru. Izuka gave him a death glare as he suddenly felt like he was close to dying. Why am I talking trash about her? Minoru knew that in a fight Izuka was extremely likely to kill him. Note to self: never do it again. Katsuki didn't bother to turn his head towards them. He just looked out, his mind fixed on what they were going to be doing. Personally, he didn't care at all for rescue training. In fact, he really didn't care at all for such heroics. He was more into the beating villains type of deal. No, what was on his mind was Izuka. Something is just off about her. Having finally taken some time outside of his blind desire to exceed her, Katsuki did some thinking about Izuka's quirk. After a while, he came to a conclusion that something was not right about it. Her parents are rather secretive about where her birth parents are. I don't think even my own mother knows. The bus finally came to a stop as Shota got up and looked at everyone. All right, if you are done talking, follow me. With that, everyone got up and were greeted with the rather large building. The unforeseen simulation joint, or the USJ as most of the staff called it. As they walked in, they were greeted by a mix of zones, each one designed after a certain scenario. Water rescue, mountain, landslide, collapsed city, and 2 domes for both the fire and hurricane disasters. Everyone looked at this, some with looks of awe on their faces. Ochako soon had a fangirl look on her face as the caretaker to the USJ, the space hero, 13. A hero who was practically a walking spacesuit. Greetings everyone and welcome to the unforeseen simulation joint, or USJ as we call it. Izuka noticed that they were missing someone. There should be 3 teachers. One of which was the symbol of peace himself. Where's his All Might? He couldn't make it as he's busy right now. 13 held up 3 fingers to Shota, who got the message. He wasn't the only one, as Izuka knew what that had meant. All Might has used up or was probably near his limit and as such couldn't appear for this. The rest of the class, however, were completely in the dark about this. They were actually wondering about why he wasn't coming. Come on, we still dash. Shota stopped and held his arm out to stop the class. 13, keep the kids safe. In the middle of the plaza, a purple mist formed, opening up as all manner of thugs started to walk out of the mist. Soon 2 other individuals walked out, each standing in front of the warp gate. Tamura looked at the 2 pro heroes and Class 1A, we're missing All Might. The warp gate closed as Kurojairi, covered by his own mists, looked at the group in front of them. Perhaps there was a last-minute change. Kurojairi stopped for a moment as he thought he could make out something in front of them. Pulling out a pair of binoculars, he looked into the crowd of students as his eyes widened. She's here? Standing with the rest of the class was Subject 6. All for One had said that she was nearby, but the fact that she was here was troubling. Who's here? Kurogyri. Kurogyri turned to Tamura. All for One had neglected to tell Tamura about his previous attempt at having successors. Perhaps because he wasn't ready to learn about them. This did, however, complain things just a bit. It's nothing, I was mistaken. Shota pulled his goggles up from his capture tool. As soon as he did, Izuka realized just who he actually was. The Erasure hero, Eraserhead, a known underground hero. He immediately jumped into the villains. The first three tried to use their quirks only for nothing to happen. For their troubles, they received a punch, elbow and a kick to the face. Looking at this, Izuka gripped her lance as it extended. Before 13 had any idea, Izuka was already down there and slammed feet first into the face of one of the mutant quirk users who tried to jump Eraserhead. No soon did she did as shadows surrounded her before 4 wolves were formed and launched themselves at the villains, who immediately tried to get the beasts off of them. You should be with the rest of the class. Izuka turned as Eraserhead snapped at her. What do you think you are doing? Dash. He stopped as Izuka raced in front of him and deflected a sword arm swing with her lance. Look, I know I'm in trouble, but I don't think you can take them all out. Izuka countered before one of her wolves bite into the villain's shoulder and pulled him to the ground. Izuka turned with the 4 wolves growing at the villains in front of them. We kind of have bigger issues right now. Class 1A just looked at the silver-haired girl stunned. Ijiro's surprise soon turned to admiration. She had literally just jumped right into the thick of it without hesitation. That has to be the manliest thing I have ever seen. Tamura looked on with annoyance at this. The plan was originally to face All Might and finally put an end to the symbol of peace. Instead, here they were with only the students and 2 pros. Furthermore, Kurogyri knew something that he wasn't telling him. Kurogyri take the girl out of the equation and then prevent the rest of them from escaping. Got it. Very well, Kurogyri shot out as a mist spreading out as the wolves attacked him. Eraserhead turned to him and tried to use his quirk to nullify Kurogyri's. Nothing happened as he was pulled out of the way by one of the many villains that had flooded the plaza. Izuka was soon swallowed up by him as Kurogyri dumped her in one of the zones that hopefully would be able to contain her for a while. When that was done, he moved over to the rest of the student body. When this is done, I just know Tamura is going to be asking me a bunch of questions. As soon as she was deposited, Izuka felt the feeling of run fall on her face and her outfit. Overhead she could see that she was within one if the 2 sealed domes from before. She was thankful her outfit was designed to be waterproof. Well, look what we have here. Izuka looked around as a few of the thugs from before were looking at her. I guess Kurogyri and Tamura has sent the first of the students to us. Izuka pointed her lance right at the thug in front of her. I am going to give you a chance to surrender. Her expression hardened as she knew about what the others are likely putting up with. Laughter came over the group. What's so funny? You just look so adorable thinking that you can intimidate us. The thugs were confident in themselves. Given how closed off this dome was, it was likely they didn't know what her quirk was. What are you doing to do about it? A smirk formed on Izuka's face as she spotted a familiar pack of wolves. Each one of them let out a growl. I'll think of something. A few minutes later, a vortex opened up as Ochako was dropped into the zone. The gravity manipulator looked around as rain poured on top of her. She picked herself up as she heard a yell out the corner. What is with this girl? Ochako turned in the direction as that same voice was heard screaming yet again. Get away from me. Ochako raced to the screen and was greeted with several thugs laying on the ground with circular bite marks in their back. Some have blood dripping out. Ochako stopped as she saw what looked like Izuka hunched over. Izuka is everything. Izuka turned around as Ochako was greeted with a horrifying sight. Red glazed eyes, crazy hair, a circular mouth with a long tongue. Without much warning, Izuka raced towards her, pinning Ochako to the wall. In pure panic, Ochako yelled out, Izuka, stop, it's me, Ochako. Izuka didn't make any sign that she heard her. Ochako closed her eyes as she expected a painful bite. It so didn't come as Ochako felt Izuka letting her go. When she opened her eyes, she saw Izuka taking deep breaths as her face returned to normal. I almost get too carried away there. Ochako felt her heart race as she let out a sigh of relief. She had just seen Izuka's monstrous form. I can see why Izuka doesn't want to show it. A shiver ran down her spine at the image. Ochako looked at the down and unloving thugs. Some looking unnaturally pale. Are they dead? Ochako, do you know what happened after I was transported here? Ochako turned to Izuka, having been brought out of her thoughts. She realized they had to focus on the now. Much of our class was sent away by that mist guy. 13 is injured having bought Tenya enough time to race and get the teachers. She stopped as she remembered what she had just caught out the corner of her eyes. I think I last saw Mr. Aizawa facing off against the leader of this attack. Izuka looked up at the top of the dome. They were in the center of the building, and given that they had no idea what the mock cityscape looked like, so they were practically in a maze. God damn it, we have to get to the plaza now. She gripped her lance as she felt something within her stare. Pointing her hand out, a dark red and black portal seemed to form in front of her. That's new. Izuka reached out as her hand phased through the portal, and when she pulled back it was fine. It looked like she had just opened up what was a warp gate of her own. Izuka, what is that? The silver-haired girl turned back to Ochako. A smirk was on Izuka's face. It's our way out. She took Ochako's arm as the two of them walked through it and found themselves in the plaza. They were greeted by the sight of Eraserhead bleeding and penned down by the monstrous, bulking-looking man while the leader looked down at him. Izuka gripped her lance and raced forward to attack him. Before she knew it, something managed to race between her and him and grabbed her lance. I almost couldn't see that. If it isn't the girl from before. Tamura crossed his arms in front of his chest. Allow me to introduce you to the anti-symbol of peace, Nomu. Nomu looked down at her with his eyes held within his exposed brain. A clear weakness that Izuka was quick to exploit. Raising her free hand up, she let out a blast of burning light straight into the exposed brain matter. Nomu let out an animalistic cry as he let go of the lance and held his head. Tamura's eyes widened in surprise. Was that another quirk? Nomu let go of his face as he gave a roar of challenge at Izuka. The heavily augmented creature swung its fist at her as Izuka dodged out of the way of the fist aimed at her. That was rather sloppy. Izuka focused on the sensation from before. Is there anyone in there? Nomu, seeing his fist at her this time, almost hitting her. Almost as before he could, Izuka opened a gate behind her and entered inside, reappearing just out of Nomu's reach. What the hell? She was showing too many abilities for Tamura's liking. How did she do that? Izuka stopped as she took a moment to think about everything that was going on. First, Eraserhead was unconscious and bleeding. They had to move him off the battlefield. Second, the opponent in front of her. Nomu, as the leader called it, seemed to be little more than a beast. In that moment she weighed her options. Then came the ever-chaotic variable of Katsuki rocketing right into Nomu with an exploding fist. I am not having Deku upstage me. He had a crazed look in his eyes as he connected with Nomu's face. Die. Before the smoke could clear, Tamura was laughing at this. You have a strong quirk, but here's the thing. Nomu's hand reached out and grabbed Katsuki by his head. Nomu's quirk is shock absorption. Nomu relieved a punch right towards Katsuki's stomach, sending him flying. Midway through the air, he lost out explosions, righting himself. Despite the augmented fist slamming into his gut, the ash blonde was barely even winded. Don't you think you can stop me with a little punch? Katsuki rocketed towards Nomu, ready for round 2. Unknown to the explosion quirk user, he had just made things a lot easier for Izuka. Okay, knowing Kaken's durability and stubbornness, he'll keep Nomu busy. True enough, Katsuki was unleashing explosions at Nomu while the brute whose shock absorption rendered it pointless. In the same vein, Katsuki's reinforced body rendered much of the force the mindless brute tried to unleash on him as a more of a minor roadblock. Ochako, get Eraserhead out of here. Ochako didn't argue as she raced towards him. Tamura caught sight of her and decided to prevent her from getting the down and unconscious pro. Before he could, a wall of ice raised up blocking his path. Shoto was standing on the other side of the plaza, providing cover for Ochako to get to their teacher. You think this would stop Dash? He caught out the corner of his eyes Izuka about to hit him thanks to the distraction the Shoto caused. A warp gate was hastily tossed up as Izuka was sent out and landed next to Shoto, instead missing her target. Appearing next to Tamura was the shadowy form of Kurogyri. Kurogyri, what great timing. Kurogyri looked at Izuka. This was getting too complicated for his comfort. Someone had broken out and was racing to the main building. The teachers of UA were soon to come by and mop up this mess. Furthermore, Subject 6 was here and fighting against them. That did not bode well for their attempt at bringing her back to her father. Tamura, I think we should make a tactical retreat. Tamura turned to him in confusion. Kurogyri was thinking that they should flee in this instance? Sure, the silver-haired girl abilities were far beyond what he expected, and he was wondering why that was. On the other side of things, Nomu had tossed Katsuki into the ground, causing him to bounce off of it and land next to Izuka and Shoto. For his credit, he still pulled himself back up despite feeling like he had gone around with a wrecking ball. Is that all you got? Shoto looked at him wondering if Katsuki didn't notice that he was actually rather injured. Then again remembering that he was able to take a building collapsing on him, he was probably still good enough to fight. Wait, you let someone slip right past you? Tamura's outburst was filled with both disbelief and anger. First, the plan was thrown off thanks to All Might not being here when they came, and now UA was going to be aware of their attack. Damn it, we rolled a 3 and now we only have a choice between running or trying our luck? Tamura held his head down in defeat. At that moment the doors of the USJ were blown off their hinges. Walking out of a dust cloud was All Might with a rather pissed expression on his face. He was halfway to the USJ building when Tenya stopped and told him about the attack on the USJ. He wasted no time racing to the facility, literally kicking up the dust trail from the force of the air moving behind him. Never fear, he ripped off the tie on his shirt as he forewent his usual smile. Right now he was just going to beat the ever-living hell out whoever he needed to. For I am here. For a second Tamura looked at All Might before a smile formed on his face. He was just about to leave and here he was. The final boss had appeared. All Might disappeared from his eyesight. A shockwave blow passed everyone, sending them flying as Nomu blocked a fist from All Might with his own. In an instinctual level, the brute knew he should stop him from touching Tamura. At last All Might. Tamura righted himself in midair as a savage look of excitement was plastered on his face. Nomu, go all out and kill him. Nomu gave a threatening roar. The lingering vestige of whatever it used to be felt a single emotion, rage. All Might, having dealt with so many trying to kill him before, was unimpressed by this. He delivered a strong punch to Nomu's gut in order to knock the brute out like he usually did to strength enhancer quirk users. Nomu didn't seem to budge at all after this. What the? Nomu then surprised All Might as he delivered a punch right to the place where All Might was wounded. Nomu pressed the attack, taking full advantage of something neither him nor Tamura understood. All Might was met with a punch to the gut followed by a right hook to the jaw. The beast was strong, stronger than most strength enhancer users he had faced. If All Might was back in his prime, this wouldn't be much of a problem. As he was now, that was a different story. All Might moved to the defensive as Nomu continued to put the pressure on him. Izuka knew that All Might was forced on the defensive because of his injury. No one but her knew about this. His quirk is shock absorption, that means he can absorb kinetic impacts. Lucky her that she had a way around that. Biting into her lip, she let her blood flow out as she once again opened up a gate in front of her. Izuka walked out as she gripped the strains of blood in her free hand and formed it into a sword. That means I can still piece it with a blade. As Nomu brought his arm back to punch All Might, Izuka brought the blood sword down and chopped the limb clean off. Nomu let out a roar in pain as All Might looked at the action with surprise. He pushed it aside as this action had created for him a much-needed opening. All Might grabbed onto Nomu's remaining arm and with a powerful swing tossed him away from him and onto the ground with a thud. All Might turned to Izuka for a moment. Thank you for the assist. Nomu pulled himself up as everyone watched as the stump of his arm was soon seen regenerating, bone, muscle and then skin right before their eyes. Nice trick, but Nomu also has a second quirk, super regeneration, so even if you do manage to injure him it would only be temporary. Tamura's words caused confusion to the faces of the 3 students there. All Might, however, had a feeling that was the case. Nomu reminded him of the dolls that his nemesis used to use. They must have found one and decided to use it against me. Suddenly he felt a tremor of pain shoot through his body. I only have 2 minutes left. All Might clenched his fists. He couldn't defeat Nomu fighting like he was now. In order to defeat this monstrosity, he was going to have to push his body's limits. Within him, he could feel the surge of energy being unleashed from his quirk. There was going to be consequences to what he was doing, but right now he couldn't think about them. Nomu roared, racing towards him as All Might meet the brute, their fists colliding as a shockwave was sent all around, pushing everyone back. The two exchanged several blows before they started to become a blur of punches with shockwaves breaking the ground below them as the two continued to exchange hits. Weren't you listening? His quirk is shock absorption. I don't care. All Might continued to punch the beast. A stray punch hit his injury, but All Might fought through the pain and continued on. Several of his punches connecting as Nomu was slowly being forced back as his fists started to strike the head of the creature. To everyone else, it looked almost like a blur, but Izuka could see what was going on. All Might was targeting his attacks, making sure to deliver as much on an impact to certain places on Nomu's body. With each punch thrown, Izuka could see something. The speed and the power that each hit seemed to have steadily increased. Her mind replayed the meeting with him. When he revealed his secret. the crippling injury and his time limit. He's pushing himself to take out Nomu regardless of his injury. All Might right hook nailed Nomu in the chest as the beast was sent flying back a short way. Watching this, Tamura's eyes widened in utter shock. Nomu tried to jump back into the attack, but All Might blocked his fist before delivering an uppercut to his chin. You said shock absorption, not shock nullification. All Might grabbed a hold of Nomu's arm as he kneed the brute in the gut, gave a jab to his temple and jumped on up. That means there is a limit to how much he can take. All Might gripped the beast's arm as he gave another knee to the gut and swung him around. With all his strength he tossed Nomu into the ground, shattering it into a mini crater as Nomu bounced into the air. The shock absorption being pushed to its limits under the onslaught, but it wasn't over. All Might landed right in front of him. Now for a lesson. Within All Might he felt his quirk, one for all, surge all his stored power. In this one instance, he would be almost punching with the full force that he used to bear in his prime. Go beyond plus ultra. With this last punch, the air around it parted like a cone as his fist made contact. Nomu's shock absorption activated and tried to contain the force. It had a limit, and this punch didn't just break the limit. It utterly demolished it in less than a second as all of it went straight through every single part of Nomu's body, shattering his bones and pulverizing his organs before finally sending him rocketing into the air and smashing right through the ceiling of the USJ. He continued on, sailing into the sky and parting the clouds before disappearing into nothing. Everyone in the building looked on in awe at this. Even Kurojiru and Tamura just looked on with complete and total surprise at the display of raw power. All Might turned to everyone as he placed his fist on his shoulder. I really have gotten weaker. Back in my prime that would have only taken 3 hits today, it took 200 mighty blows to take him out. At that, his body was screaming at him. He had pushed his body well past its limit, both in time and in power that he could use. Just holding his state was becoming a huge strain. Already his hair was starting to fall and steam was coming off his body. I can't hold this for much longer. Tamura started to scratch his neck in frustration. He was told that Nomu could fight, defeat, and above all kill All Might. Instead, All Might had defeated Nomu, and it was all thanks to that girl. The girl who seemed to have more than one quirk. An impossibility, as anyone with more than one quirk should be like Nomu, a living meat doll. How can this be? Kurojiru looked at Tamura. He was agitated about all of this. Furthermore, he was likely questioning how Subject 6 could do that she could. Kurojiru knew they had to get out of here now before the teachers show up. Tamura, we need to make a tactical withdrawal. The words of the warp gate user snapped Tamura out of his state. He was right, they had to get out of here before the heroes showed up. He gave All Might a hateful glare. This isn't over, mark my words, you will d-dash. He didn't get to finish as a bullet shot through his wrists, followed by another 2 shooting through his ankles. The teachers of UA had finally arrived with Snipe holding his gun out. He shot few more bullets at Kurojiru. The warp quirk user simply opened a gate and sent the bullets back at him, forcing Snipe to shoot them out of the air. Kurojiru quickly raced to Tamura as the down of them disappeared within a vortex of mists. Kurojiru dropped off the injured Tamura as the both of them took a moment to take their breath. At the side of the bar, the TV screen turned itself on as the voice of All for One spoke through. I take it that there were complications? Tamura pulled himself to sit up. He looked to the TV screen, the hand on his face almost falling over. Nomu fought All Might and was defeated. There was a mix of anger and confusion in his tone. I thought you said Nomu could defeat him. Could being the appropriate word. All for One didn't have a gauge to measure how much of his strength All Might was able to use. That's why he made sure to further develop Nomu's body and abilities. The process was almost reminiscent of his other creations from a few years ago. Clearly, while he is crippled, All Might still has a lot of strength still left in him, though take comfort in that he might have pushed himself too far. With his injured body, All for One theorized that if he pushed himself too much, his quirk might put more strain on his body. It was very likely to cut through the time he had to remain the symbol of peace, or assuming that he had passed on his quirk, limit the remaining time the embers had to burn. Sir, Kurojiru walked over to Tamura as he started to tend to the wounds. Subject 6 was there among the students. That caught Tamura's attention. He looked on at the TV with confusion. The first thing on his mind was the silver-haired girl. She had used so many abilities, too many for any normal quirk. You're talking about that girl from before, aren't you? He wanted answers as to why she seemed to be able to do all of that. He could still feel the burn on his hands from her light attack. Who was she? A pause filled the room before All for One finally answered. Subject 6 is, in a sense, my daughter. Behind the hand, Tamura's eyes widened in shock. Though I do wonder if she still knows the name I gave her. Inko hummed to herself as she finished up putting the roost in the oven. It was her husband's favorite. Something he had tasted during his first mission overboard and severed as something of a family ritual each time he came back from one of his missions. I wonder how Izuka is doing. She knew she really shouldn't worry about her. Izuka was, as Hisashi kept telling her, more than capable of taking on anything the school throw at her. Still, she couldn't help but worry about her nonetheless. The sound of the doorbell ringing caught her attention. That's strange, she wasn't expecting anyone at this hour. I wonder who it could be. Opening the door, she was greeted with a young woman with black feathered wings coming from out her lower back, yellow eyes, and horns curved around her head. She was wearing an expensive white silk outfit with a spiderweb-shaped necklace hanging over her chest. You must be Inko Midoriya, it's a pleasure to meet you. Yes, can I help you, miss? Inko was rather put off by the sudden appearance of the woman in front of her. Albedo, the newly introduced woman, looked around. Is Shalltear here? Albedo shook her head before remembering what was written on the papers. Sorry, I meant is Izuka here? What was said next caused Inko to look on with total shock. I would like to meet my sister. Toshinori laid in the bed as his whole body ached in utter pain. The effect of pushing hid quirk back into the realm of what it once was. Sadly, his body just couldn't take that kind of power, not anymore. Recovery Girl had given him an earful about it. Looking out the window, he wondered just how much of his time limit he lost from doing something as reckless as that. I won't know until about a full day of recovery. The sound of the door opening caught his attention. Standing in the doorway was Naomasa, his friend on the force. The police detective looked at the bedridden symbol of peace. We found Nomu at the edge of campus, his body still a bit broken from your punch, though surprisingly enough he's done nothing to resist. Toshinori wasn't even sure that Nomu knew what was going on around him. He was more of a puppet with the single-mindedness it had shown him. Naomasa had gone over the report from the villain attack and figured that all might deserve to hear the news. Even the more unsettling parts. Both Eraserhead and 13 are sent to the intensive care ward, and we found a few of the villains dead. A sigh escaped Toshinori's mouth at this. It was a fact of the job that heroes would end up dealing with medical care. Another fact was that there were times that heroes had no choice to kill or that it happened by accident. I figured Eraserhead did it to a few of the villains by accident. Naomasa looked at him with a confused expression. Sure, the villains that Eraserhead took out were injured, but none were killed. So, the bodies were found in one of the typhoon zone. Toshinori turned his head to him, confused by what he meant. The bodies were found with much or all of their blood missing and circular bite marks on their bodies. Izuka got off her train as she looked up the news played on a screen overhead. The USJ incident, as it was being called, was quickly becoming the talk of all the news channels and sites. The silver-haired girl didn't pay any attention to it as she headed home. I think Mom's probably panicking at home right now. Izuka just knew her mother was going to fuss all about her the moment she got home. The sound of an alert on her phone caught her attention. She pulled it out with a small smile. After all the chaos of the attack, Mina figured that they should share their numbers with each other. So, in the end, she had basically half the class in her contacts. Looks like Ochako finally got home and added me. In a hurry to get up and to school, Ochako had forgotten to bring her phone. She promised to add her as soon as she got home. Reading the text, she was wondering if they could hang out tomorrow. After the attack, the school, it seemed, was going to let them have tomorrow off. Seeing as Izuka had nothing to do, she might as well. Texting back, Izuka placed her phone into her pocket as she had finally got home. Izuka let out a sigh as she knew that her mother was probably worried sick. Mom, I'm home, there no need to worry. Izuka stopped as opening the door she was greeted with the sight of her mother having tea with someone else. Wait, why do I feel like I know her? She had never met her before, that much was certain. Yet she was sure she knew her regardless. Who are you? Albedo was surprised by this. Catching sight of Inko out the side of her eyes, she realized that she shouldn't be. Unlike Albedo, who had the knowledge of her siblings in her mind, she didn't, having been effectively raised from an infant to who she was. Oh, Izuka, you know how you always asked about where you come from? Well, you see. Silence filled the room as Izuka just took all that was said in. Her mother had finally revealed her origins. She was not born but created in a lab. The woman who she strangely was familiar with happened to buy her sister, Albedo. One of 8 siblings she had, who was made as well by the same person or group for reasons unknown. What did you say my name was? Izuka was, of course, referring to the name she was given by her creator. A name that she didn't quite remember yet. Despite this fact, she still felt familiarity with it. Shalltear. When the words left her mouth, Albedo had a questioning look. Though if you want I can refer to you as Izuka. Actually, I'm okay with either. She turned over to Inko as a million thoughts raced through her mind. Now that she had discovered her origins, she was unsure about what to do. She turned to Albedo. Do you know where the others are? Albedo shook her head at this. Not really, I only managed to find you by luck. Well, there was a bit more to that though. Albedo didn't know if she should talk about it. Besides, only know the names of 3 of our siblings, but beyond that nothing else. Albedo's eyes fell on the condensed lance that Izuka had on her. If you don't mind me asking, what exactly is that? Inko decided to choose that moment to speak. It's a lance that Hisashi got her for UA. Albedo was surprised to hear that but looked at the outfit that Izuka was wearing. It was the uniform for a UA student. You're enrolled at U.A? Yeah, I got into the hero course and I'm also my class representative. The sound of her phone going off caught Izuka's attention. Pulling it out, she saw that it was a text from Mina. Of all the times to text me. She looked up at the two of them. I have to take this for a few minutes. Dismissing herself, Izuka headed to her room to take the call. This just left Inko and Albedo to themselves. The brunette woman had a sigh as she watched her little girl walk out. She felt like a terrible mother keeping a secret like this from her, only to tell her now that Albedo was here. If I might ask, where is your husband at? Inko turned to her guest. Though guest was a bit of weird term for Albedo. Technically she was Izuka's sibling, so calling her a guest felt slightly wrong. Hisashi is coming home tonight after completing his mission. Inko placed her tea down as she turned over to Izuka's room. If you want, I'm sure we would be happy to have you with us. Thank you for the offer, but I don't want to be a bother. Inko waved her hands in front of her face. Oh, no worries, I made more than enough if you want to stay. Inko gave her a smile as Albedo, after a few moments, decided to just go with it. The loss of Nomu was manageable. There was nothing of importance within his mind and there weren't any clues to help the police find him. No, the bigger loss was the knowledge that one of his children were at UA. I knew I should have gone and retrieved her. All for one pushed those thoughts aside. He hadn't lost her yet. In fact, it's possible she could still be brought back to his fold. As he thought about this, he received an update in the news. The attack on the USJ was consuming the news, but that wasn't what he was looking at. No, Subject 5 was being hunted by heroes and was possibly being tracked, coming closer to him. All the while one of my rivals is keeping track of him. Speaking of the developments, he had discovered that someone was rallying the small criminal groups in the north to their banner. Who exactly he couldn't say, but whoever they were not there a month ago. He was going to have to send a mole up there and see if this was a rival or a former member of his organization who had gotten rather emboldened. A warp gate opened up in front of him as Kurojairi walked through. The mist man looked at the crime lord. Tamura is taking the revelation well, all things considered. The news about his first attempt to create successors was a surprise for Tamura. Still, Kurojairi thought he was taking this rather well. Though he doesn't seem to have a high opinion on Shalltear. Really? All for one could understand his reasoning. Tamura had failed at killing All Might because of her. An act that very much soured his worldview of Shalltear, even if the circumstances of their meeting was not what he had envisioned. A shame, I had hoped for the two of them to get along, you know. Kurojairi looked at one of the news reports on the screen. The one about Subject 5. Kurojairi, reading the list of deaths, had a terrible feeling about him. He moving towards us, and from the looks of things I don't think he would cooperate. No, though perhaps we can use him to take out All Might. All for one remembered his abilities. Shape-shifting, regeneration, strength, full body sight, and he was sure a few others might have mutated as a side effect of the mixing. A smile formed as he was starting to like this thought. Kurojairi was unsure on if it was a wise choice. Though he did admit he didn't know much about Subject 5, so for all he knew this could be a good idea. I might need to keep this a secret from Tamura if it does happen. Katsuki looked up at his ceiling. His mind was racing on the events of today. An organized attack on UA. Just talking about it seemed utterly silly, and yet he had seen it. Everyone is talking about how Izuka helped All Might. Normally Katsuki wouldn't care about the extras. However, when they were all giving praise to Izuka for helping All Might against Nomu. He was the one who fought the brute beforehand, and yet no one cares about him. Smoke started to rise from his face as his anger for his silver-haired rival returned. We have a free day tomorrow. A plan formed in his mind. He was going to confront Izuka about this and settle the score once and for all. There was nothing about him fighting Izuka outside of school. Speaking of Nomu, he was starting to get suspicious of Izuka. The silver-haired girl had far too many abilities for her quirk. I'm getting to the bottom of this. Yo, boy, get down here for dinner unless you want it to get cold. Leave it to his mother to ruin his mood. Katsuki shot up with annoyance in his tone as he yelled back. I was in thought, you old hag. Hisashi looked between his wife, his daughter, and the guest for the evening. He had just gotten back and already he learned that the secret about Izuka had been revealed, or shalltear as her sister knew her, and on that note, he was meeting one of Izuka's 8 siblings. Hisashi shrugged his shoulders at all of this. You know, I honestly am surprised, though I figured one day something like this might have happened. Hisashi turned to Izuka, though that wasn't the only thing to happen today, was it? Leave it to her father to have seen the news. Inko looked at Izuka with a concerned look on her face. What happened? Nothing, just, seriously, she rather not have to talk about this to her mother right now. Though it wasn't like she could keep it a secret forever. A villain group attacked us while we were training at the USJ building. No soon as those words left her mouth did Inko start to have a panic attack. You were attacked by a bunch of villains? Before she could continue, Hisashi placed a hand on her shoulder. Come on, Inko, she's alright. All Might sent the villains running, so no worries. His attempt to stop her from panicking didn't really succeed. Inko could let a lot of things slide, but a villain attack at UA wasn't one of this. Hisashi, how could you say that Izuka could have been injured? But she isn't. Izuka can regenerate from injury. How is that something to be concerned about? Albedo looked at the two of them as they argued back and forth. She turned her head over to Izuka, who was just watching this exchange with a neutral look on her face. It was clear she was used to this sort of back and forth between her adopted parents. Are they always like this? She turned to her with a sigh. No, usually Dad can talk her out on it, but sometimes this happens. She motioned as Inko started to berate her husband for being reckless. I've gotten really good at tuning it out. Albedo turned back as the conversation had moved away from Izuka and was now on to Hisashi. The winged woman could understand why, as she just watched the scene with Inko complaining about his missions taking him away from home while Hisashi pointed out all the good he did, along with a side comment on all he did to get in the criminal's good graces. They do know that we are standing here, right? The next day Izuka stood outside on the beach as she started practicing with her gate ability. Last night she had asked about what Albedo knew about her abilities. Her sister had explained that the files on her were incomplete, and besides the ones she had already discovered, Albedo did explain that she could use them for more than she had at first thought. For her shadow constructs, it turns out she could form rats and bats along with wolves, that she could collect the blood from her enemies as a means to heal herself and replenish her stamina. The one power that Albedo did know from the incomplete files as something about her being able to create a clone of herself. How exactly she could do it wasn't specified. At first, Izuka thought it was something to do with her other powers, but after a few minutes of trying to get it to work, it started to look like a different power. Alright, so far I seem able to open gates to anywhere I have already visited. She had tested this out by opening a gate just outside of UA. The moment she did, she had almost gotten attacked by a few of the teachers. After a bit of a scolding, she made a promise never to use it near the school until they could fix the alarms for her unique gate signature. Taking out her notebook, Izuka wrote down several theories on how she could trigger her clone ability. So far each ability seemed to have come seemingly at random. Except for the gate power, which could how of necessity. This would be easier if I knew how I was made. Putting her notebook away, her thoughts turned over to Albedo. She didn't ask about what her abilities that her own chimeric quirk had. Figures I would find you out here training. Izuka had a light groan of annoyance. Turning around, she saw Katsuki standing out with his arms crossed. She was not in the mood to deal with him right now. What do you want, Kaken? That villain from yesterday had 2 quirks. He was giving her a glare. Izuka shot one back at him as she knew what he was getting at. Before anything else could go on, someone else walked behind Katsuki. Izuka, who is this idiot that is bothering you? Katsuki turned around as was greeted with Albedo, who had her arms crossed. She figured that the two of them knew one another, seeing how he was talking about a villain with 2 quirks. Though from the way he was looking at her she could tell that he wasn't a friend of Izuka's. I think annoying would be a better word to describe of Kaken. A smirk formed on Izuka's face, though calling him an idiot is also true. The ash blonde tried to control his anger as he knew Izuka was trying to get under his skin. Instead, he focused on the newcomer. Katsuki was sure he hadn't seen her before and was actually wondering just how she and Izuka knew each other. Who are you anyway? Albedo looked at the ash blonde and almost wanted to laugh at his attempt to sound tough. Though looking at him she figured he was Izuka's so-called rival, or as Hisashi called him, the angry blonde who was close to going on a rampage. My name is Albedo and I am Shalltear's sister. Who the hell is Shalltear? All Katsuki saw was Izuka and Albedo. His first thought was that they were both messing with him. Izuka rolled her eyes at this. Sure, she loved to mess with Katsuki, but this wasn't fair on his part. She means me as my birth name is Shalltear. Izuka walked up to Albedo as Katsuki still looked with confusion. He knew that Izuka was adopted, but this was new. Albedo had come over yesterday and told me about where I came from and my birth name of Shalltear. Surprisingly, Katsuki didn't talk for a full minute. The ash blonde just stared at the two of them as he actually wondered how they were related. Sure, it could be a mutation quirk type deal, but still, something about this was fishy. There is something about this that I will find out about. Katsuki just gave out a huff. Whatever, Deku, not like I care about your freaky birth family or whatever. Albedo shot him a glare as she knew what Deku meant. Already she met him and hated him. She wondered why no one had put him in his place. Hell, she wondered why her sister didn't just put him in his place. Maybe I should teach him a lesson that he won't forget? Izuka, who was used to his attitude, just rolled her eyes in annoyance. She had expected him to be a bit more humble after losing to her in the fight he wanted, but maybe it just didn't take like she had hoped. If you don't care, then maybe you can leave us alone then? Katsuki was about to yell back at her when he caught sight of the glare that Albedo was giving him. For a moment he felt a tingle of fear shot through his spine. He very quickly crushed the feeling but decided it was best to see himself out. Fine, but know this, I will figure out how you can do all those crazy things with your quirk. With his piece said, Katsuki took his leave. Albedo looked at the ash blonde before turning to Izuka. Why do you put up with him? The silver-haired girl shrugged her shoulders. Haven't you tried teaching him his place? I did fight and defeated him during one of our class tests. Izuka thought back to that scenario where Katsuki had gotten crushed under the building and effectively lost the whole thing. I think that the hit to his pride only had the opposite effect on him. Though Izuka was wondering if he had a new obsession with her. He wanted to know how her quirk could do what it did. Katsuki was many things, but one of them he wasn't was stupid. Several times had he proven that with his drive to be better than her showing in their grades. Depending on the subject, either he was better than her by a small margin or was just beyond her by a tiny amount. Speaking of that, Nomu did have more than one quirk, and my own is very much similar in that regards. Thinking about it, Izuka did wonder on just who could do something like that. Her train of thought moved to her as she started to wonder if the same person that created Nomu had a hand in creating her and Albedo. It's possible, but if that is the case, doesn't that mean I was made to be some kind of weapon for a villain? The USJ incident had been looked into thoroughly by the faculty. The issue that allowed the villains to bypass their defensives was dealt with as soon as they found it. An upgrade was, of course, in order for all the systems, along with an extra warning system. After that, each of the teachers took rounds to make sure that everything was in working order. While all this was needed to ensure that this had never happened again, and indeed the media was after some time slowly turning positive, another problem had arisen. Nizu looked at Toshinori as he had told him about the pain he felt and what that sadly meant for both him and the school. His time limit had taken a huge hit by pushing himself as far as he did. This is not good. How long do you think you can hold your All Might form now? Toshinori looked at the principal as he gave his best guess. I think somewhere around an hour at most. That was far more than he had wanted. This meant that his time as All Might was being pushed ever closer to an end, furthering his need to pick a successor. What's worse is I have a suspicion that my nemesis might not be all that dead, or someone has taken up his legacy. Nizu had a sigh as he knew that was the case. As much as he wanted to hope that this wasn't the case, all signs pointed otherwise. That, of course, brought them to the one reason why Toshinori was here. I know I shouldn't rush you, but we have to find a successor soon if this is just the prelude to something much worse. I know. He closed his eyes as he thought back to the action from yesterday. He was looking for an action from someone that would catch his attention. That was one such action, though there was a bit about the dead villains. Still, it wasn't like his predecessor didn't do such things when push comes to shove. Her power was to break apart organic flesh after all. Though I think one of the students have caught my eye. Really? Nizu was surprised that he was already looking at someone for a successor. He had an idea on who, seeing as there were 4 students who had made it to the plaza. That is wonderful news to hear. Within a dark building, a meeting was taking place among a group of small gangs. In the last week, someone had been uniting the small-time bands of criminals and thugs under one banner within their area. This meeting was about what they knew of the guy that was slowly creating an organized crime syndicate. Nothing on what he or she looks like? No, this guy seems to be able to communicate directly with someone's mind. A telepathy quirk was a rarity, and it made finding out who was uniting the forces all the more difficult. Even then they seemed to speak with both a man and a woman's voice. The group looked around as they debated on what to do about all of this. After a few minutes of intense debate, it was decided that they would work together to counter this growing threat. How funny that the lot of you thought you could conspire against me. The group froze up as they heard a voice in their heads. A voice that wasn't their own, and like one of them had said sounded like a man and a woman at the same time. Before they all knew, the chairs they were sitting on was crushed into their chairs. My father let you run wild on your own for reasons that I do not know, but that ends today. The doors opened up as the room was flooded with grunts from the growing gang. A man at the table knew what this was. We rather die than serve you. So be it. Outside rain fell as the sounds of a fight, or more fittingly a massacre, broke out within the building. In the rain, a figure looked on with a heavy black cloak. This was the growing leader they were talking about. A shame really, they had so much potential under my care. A bolt of lightning flashed as this figure floated up into the air. Its mind turning to the news earlier about the attack on the USJ. I have a feeling that such an organization has my father's backing. If so, then I shouldn't interfere with it, unlike someone I know. And that is it for today. The story is nearing its end. Remember to subscribe and like for more.